I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating aggressively on my nightstand. Groggy and half asleep, I reached for it, barely managing to swipe at the screen before it slipped from my grasp and tumbled onto the floor. A familiar voice blared through the speaker, urgent and exasperated. It was my neighbor, Dave. "Dude, you need to get outside now. You're not going to believe this." Still rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I stumbled to the window, pulled the curtain back, and felt my jaw practically unhinge. There, sitting right in the middle of my driveway, was a massive, gleaming white SUV, parked so arrogantly that it stretched across both lanes of my concrete path. My driveway was completely blocked, my car trapped inside, my ability to leave for work completely annihilated. For a few seconds, I thought maybe there had been some kind of mistake. Maybe someone had a medical emergency and had to stop abruptly. Maybe there had been an accident. But as my eyes trailed up to the porch across the street, any benefit of the doubt was incinerated on sight. Standing there, coffee mug in hand, was the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, Karen. She sipped her overpriced morning brew with the kind of smug satisfaction only a true menace could muster, her manicured nails tapping idly against the ceramic. I stormed outside, barely managing to pull on a pair of sneakers before slamming my front door behind me. Dave stood at the edge of his lawn, arms crossed, shaking his head. "I tried knocking, man," he muttered. She just smirked and said something about HOA priority parking or some crap. Marching across my yard, I called out, "Karen, what the hell is this?" She turned her head slowly, taking another deliberate sip of coffee before responding. "Oh, good morning. Lovely weather, isn't it?" I gestured furiously at the SUV. "Move your car." Her expression barely changed, except for a tiny, insufferable smirk that deepened at the corner of her mouth. "Oh, this? It's temporary. I needed extra space while the landscapers work on my front yard. You don't mind, do you?" My hands clenched into fists. "Of course I mind. That's my driveway. I can't even leave my house because of you." She shrugged, feigning innocence. "Well, I don't see why you're so upset. There's plenty of street parking available." My blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels. "That's not the point. You can't just park in my driveway like it's yours." Karen sighed dramatically, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Well, actually, according to the HOA bylaws, driveways can be considered shared spaces under certain conditions. It's a bit of a gray area, really, but I wouldn't expect you to understand how these things work." The sheer audacity of her words nearly knocked me off balance. A gray area? What kind of nonsense was this? I had read the HOA rules cover to cover when I moved in. Nowhere did it say anything about someone else being able to hijack my driveway for their own convenience. "Karen," I said, struggling to keep my voice even, "if you don't move your car, I will call a tow truck." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, as if she had been waiting for me to say that. "Oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you," she mused. "You see, I spoke to the HOA board yesterday, and they agreed that in certain cases, parking restrictions might not be strictly enforced. It would be such a shame if you were hit with some kind of violation fee, wouldn't it?" My stomach twisted. That was a threat, a thinly veiled, passive-aggressive threat wrapped in faux politeness. Karen was a high-ranking member of the HOA, and she had spent years twisting rules to benefit herself while enforcing them mercilessly on others. If I went through official channels, I already knew what would happen. I'd be drowned in bureaucratic nonsense while Karen continued to park her monstrosity of a vehicle in my driveway, untouched and untouchable. Dave let out a low whistle from behind me. "Man, this is some next-level evil." I wasn't going to let her win that easy. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of the nearest tow company, stepping away from Karen's gloating gaze. The moment someone picked up, I wasted no time. "Yeah, I need a vehicle removed from my driveway. It's completely blocking my property, and the owner refuses to move it." The dispatcher's voice on the other end was calm, almost bored. "Is the vehicle illegally parked?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Do you have proof that it's unauthorized?" I faltered. "Well, I mean, it's my driveway. I live here." The dispatcher sighed. "If the vehicle's owner is claiming they have permission or any kind of HOA jurisdiction, we can't tow without explicit documentation. You'll have to go through legal channels." I clenched my jaw. "Are you serious?" "Sorry, sir. HOA disputes are a legal gray area. We can't get involved." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, disbelief settling in like a thick fog. Karen had played her hand well. She had maneuvered just within the bounds of plausible deniability, using the HOA as her shield while she trampled over my rights. She tilted her head, eyes gleaming with amusement. Oh dear, no luck. I turned to Dave, who was already pulling up something on his own phone. Dude, he muttered, this is straight up war. A war that I refuse to lose. That night, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat down and started reading through every legal document related to my property, scouring through HOA bylaws, city codes, and land use regulations. If Karen wanted to use loopholes, I'd find some of my own. And that's when I stumbled upon it, a single, beautifully absurd yet completely legal loophole buried in the fine print. Karen had made one critical mistake. She had assumed my driveway was just a slab of concrete, but technically, my property extended beneath it, which meant if I couldn't park there, neither could she. I leaned back in my chair, my frustration melting into something else entirely. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. Fine. If Karen wanted to block my driveway, I'd make sure she regretted it. Because starting tomorrow, I was digging a moat. I sat at my desk, staring at the old property documents spread out in front of me. My frustration with Karen had reached a boiling point, but instead of letting it consume me, I was channeling it into something far more productive. The loophole was right there, buried in legal jargon that most people would have skimmed past. My property didn't just include the surface of my driveway, it extended beneath it. That meant, technically, I could do whatever I wanted with the ground below. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the desk, considering my options. I could dig up the driveway entirely and turn it into a giant hole. That would definitely make it impossible for Karen to park there, but it wasn't elegant enough. It needed to be something grand, something ridiculous, yet completely legal. My mind raced through ideas. Spikes, too dangerous. A giant wall, too easy to work around. Then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit me. A moat. The more I thought about it, the more I loved the idea. A moat wasn't just an obstacle, it was a statement. It was the ultimate act of petty brilliance, something that would make it physically impossible for Karen to ever set foot on my driveway again. And the best part? It was technically just landscaping. I could get city permits for water feature installation, and no one could do a thing about it. I grabbed my phone and started researching. Digging a moat wasn't exactly a common home improvement project, but it wasn't unheard of either. Some eccentric homeowners had done it before, mainly for aesthetic reasons. I found articles about historical moats, DIY backyard pond installations, and even modern security trenches used by some off-the-grid enthusiasts. The key would be making it deep enough to prevent anyone from crossing easily, but not so deep that it would violate any construction codes. Once I had a general plan in mind, I called up my lawyer. He was used to my bizarre legal questions by now, so when I asked if I was allowed to dig a massive trench around my driveway, he barely even hesitated before responding. Technically, yes. As long as it doesn't violate any utility easements and you have the right permits, it's your land. But I have to ask, what? I explained the situation, and by the end of my explanation, he was laughing so hard, he had to put me on hold for a moment to catch his breath. When he came back, he simply said, I would pay money to see the HOA's reaction to this. That was all the confirmation I needed. The next step was getting the permits. I drove down to the city planning office and filled out the necessary paperwork. I phrased everything carefully, using terms like decorative water feature and enhanced property landscaping to avoid raising any red flags. The clerk barely glanced at my application before stamping it and handing me a copy. It was that easy. With legal approval in hand, I needed to figure out the logistics. Digging an entire moat wasn't a job for one person. I needed equipment, manpower, and a plan for water flow. Fortunately, I had friends who loved chaos just as much as I did. I called up Mike, an old college buddy who ran a small construction business, and pitched him the idea. At first, he thought I was joking. Then, when he realized I was completely serious, he let out a low whistle and said, "This is either the dumbest thing you've ever done or the greatest. Either way, I'm in." We met up that evening to go over the details. Mike had access to excavation equipment, which would make the digging process much faster. We marked out the area, ensuring the moat would be wide enough to prevent a car from crossing, but not so wide that it would encroach on the sidewalk. The next morning, the work began. The first step was removing the existing driveway surface. I half expected Karen to come storming over the second she saw us breaking ground, but to my surprise, she wasn't around. Either she hadn't noticed yet, or she assumed I was just making repairs. That illusion shattered when the excavation crew showed up with heavy machinery. By midday, Karen had emerged from her house, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she realized what was happening. She marched over, arms crossed tightly, and demanded, "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I wiped the sweat from my forehead and gave her my most innocent look. "Oh, just making some improvements to my property. You know, landscaping." Her eyes darted to the massive hole already forming. "This isn't landscaping. This is destruction." I pulled out my permit, holding it up for her to see. "Actually, it's all approved. Perfectly legal." Her jaw tightened as she read over the paperwork. "This is ridiculous. The HOA will never allow it." I smiled. Funny thing about that. The HOA doesn't actually have jurisdiction over excavation projects as long as they comply with city regulations. She was seething now. "You can't just dig a giant hole in the middle of your property." I shrugged. "Sure I can. It's my land." For the first time since this entire feud started, Karen looked genuinely uncertain. She stormed off, probably to make a dozen angry phone calls. But there was nothing she could do to stop me. The digging continued. By the end of the first day, we had made significant progress. The trench was starting to take shape, and my vision was becoming reality. As we wrapped up, Mike clapped me on the back. I got to say, "Man, I've worked on a lot of projects, but this is next level." That night, I couldn't stop grinning. The best part was still to come. A moat was good, but a moat with a drawbridge? That was perfection. Karen had played dirty, using HOA loopholes to push me around. Now, I was using the system against her in the most spectacular way possible. She wanted a battle over my driveway. She was about to lose in the most absurd and humiliating way imaginable. The first morning of full excavation felt like a victory before it even began. I stood on my porch, sipping coffee as the crew arrived with their machines, ready to carve my moat into existence. The air was crisp, the sun was shining, and best of all, Karen had no idea how much worse this was about to get for her. The construction noise started early, the deep rumble of the excavator shaking the ground as it dug deeper and wider with every pass. I could already see the trench forming, a perfectly calculated pit that stretched across the length of my driveway. Dirt piled up along the edges, creating a small ridge that would later be shaped into a more structured barrier. Every bucketful of soil removed was another inch of satisfaction. It didn't take long before Karen came storming out of her house, her face a shade of red that I hadn't even known was possible. She didn't walk. She marched, her arms swinging with the kind of determination only seen in people who truly believe the universe revolves around them. She stopped at the edge of the trench, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "What the hell is this?" she finally shrieked, pointing at the growing pit. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to infuriate her further before answering. "This? Oh, this is my driveway improvement project." She blinked rapidly, as if her brain couldn't process the words. "You dug a hole?" I nodded. "Yep. A huge hole." "Yep. In your driveway?" Again. "Yep." Her fingers clenched into fists. "This is insane. You can't just dig up your entire driveway." I pulled out my permits, letting them dangle lazily in my hand. "Actually, I can. It's all legal. Decorative landscaping, water feature installation." I checked all the boxes. She snatched the paper from me, scanning through the details, her expression twisting with frustration. "You're seriously going through with this?" I grinned. "Oh, absolutely." Her head snapped toward the construction crew. "Stop. Stop this immediately. This is an HOA violation." One of the workers, a burly guy named Lewis, shrugged. "We got the paperwork. Not our problem." Karen whipped her head back to me, eyes blazing. "This is harassment." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? So blocking my driveway for weeks wasn't?" She sputtered, but I wasn't interested in hearing whatever nonsense excuse she was about to throw at me. I turned my back on her, watching as the trench deepened. By noon, it was nearly 3 feet down, and by the end of the day, it had reached a solid 5 feet, wide enough that no car could pass, deep enough that even the most determined person would think twice before trying to walk across. That evening, as the crew wrapped up and left, I stood at the edge of my newly formed moat, admiring the absolute absurdity of what I had just done. Karen was pacing on her porch, furiously typing away on her phone. No doubt she was calling the HOA, the city, maybe even the mayor if she thought it would help her. But she was wasting her time. The next morning, the real fun began. As expected, a few HOA board members showed up, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to outright amusement. One of them, a middle-aged guy named Frank who had always seemed somewhat reasonable, adjusted his glasses and looked at the pit. "Well, I have to say, I wasn't expecting this," he said. Karen folded her arms. You see? This is a clear violation of the HOA rules. Frank scratched his chin. Actually, I don't think it is. The bylaws don't say anything about digging a moat. Karen's mouth dropped open. You cannot be serious. Frank shrugged. It's private property. As long as it's within city regulations, it's out of our hands. Karen let out a sound that could only be described as a mix between a growl and a screech. She turned to me, her voice low and venomous. You think you're clever? I smirked. I think I'm very clever. She stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard that one of her hanging porch decorations fell off. I turned back to Frank, who was now grinning. You really don't like her, huh? He asked. I laughed. Not even a little bit. He chuckled. Well, I have to hand it to you. This is creative. I nodded. Oh, it's not even done yet. Frank raised an eyebrow but didn't ask further. He just shook his head in disbelief and walked away. The next phase was filling the moat with water. I had a few options: install a pump system, hook it up to a controlled water source, or simply wait for rain to do the job. I decided on a combination. I rented a few water tanks and had them delivered, slowly filling the trench over the course of the next few days. Karen, meanwhile, had gone suspiciously quiet. No more shouting, no more threats, no more HOA complaints. It made me uneasy. She wasn't the type to give up. She was planning something. My suspicions were confirmed when, late one night, my security cameras picked up movement near the moat. I pulled up the feed on my phone, squinting at the grainy footage. There, standing at the edge of the trench, was Karen, holding a long wooden plank. She was trying to make a bridge. I watched, barely holding back laughter, as she struggled to balance the plank across the water. She inched forward, testing the weight, clearly intending to make her way across. Then, in a moment of pure poetic justice, the plank slipped. With a loud splash, Karen went face first into the moat. I nearly dropped my phone from laughing so hard. The cameras caught every second of her thrashing, her soaked form scrambling to get out. She finally managed to drag herself onto dry land, her clothes dripping, her hair plastered to her face. She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, before letting out a frustrated scream and stomping back toward her house. I saved the footage. I wasn't going to post it, at least not yet, but knowing that I had solid proof of her own stupidity felt like the ultimate win. The next morning, I casually waved to her as she stormed to her car, still visibly fuming. She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. She had lost this round, and she knew it. But I wasn't done. The moat was only part one. The drawbridge was next. The next step in my grand plan was installing the drawbridge. A moat was good, but a moat with a functioning drawbridge? That was legendary. The idea had started as a joke in my mind, a way to make Karen regret ever thinking she could control my driveway. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it was completely doable. With the right materials and some mechanical ingenuity, I could build something that not only worked but would also make sure Karen never set foot near my driveway again. I spent the next few days deep in research, watching countless videos on drawbridge mechanisms, medieval castle defenses, and modern hydraulic lifts. The biggest challenge was figuring out how to make it functional while keeping it simple enough to maintain. I didn't need something overly complex, just a sturdy platform that could be raised and lowered at the push of a button. Mike, my contractor friend who had helped dig the moat, was immediately on board when I told him about the next phase. You want a functioning drawbridge? He asked, barely able to contain his grin. Man, you really don't do things halfway, do you? Not when it comes to winning, I replied. He agreed to help me build it. We started with a sturdy wooden platform reinforced with steel, strong enough to hold my car, but light enough to be lifted by a hydraulic system. Mike knew a guy who specialized in custom car lifts, and with a little tweaking, we had a plan. We ordered the materials, got the hydraulic setup ready, and within days, we were assembling my very own medieval and modern driveway defense system. Karen, of course, had been watching the entire time, lurking on her porch with narrowed eyes. I could practically see the steam coming out of her ears. Every time she tried to call the HOA, they either ignored her or told her that there was nothing they could do. The moat was legal. The drawbridge was just a fancy driveway gate. She was running out of options, and I knew it was driving her crazy. The installation process took longer than expected, mostly because we wanted to make sure everything was done right. The hydraulic arms had to be carefully aligned, the bridge itself needed to be balanced, and most importantly, the controls had to be secure so that only I could operate it. I had a wireless remote system installed, meaning I could raise and lower the bridge from inside my house or even from my car. On the day of the first test, a small crowd had gathered. A few neighbors had come out, curious about what I had been building. Even Frank, the HOA board member who had found the whole situation hilarious, showed up with a lawn chair and a beer. "All right," I said, standing by the control panel. "Let's see if this works." With the press of a button, the hydraulic system whirred to life. Slowly, the bridge began to rise, lifting off the ground like something out of a medieval fortress. A collective gasp went through the small audience, followed by scattered applause. Even I had to admit, it looked incredible. Karen, however, was not impressed. She stormed across the street, barely stopping herself before reaching the edge of the moat. "This has gone far enough," she screeched. I turned to her with a polite smile. "What seems to be the problem, Karen?" "This." She flung her arms toward the drawbridge. "This is absurd. You're making a mockery of this neighborhood." I shrugged. "I'm just improving my property. Isn't that what good homeowners do?" "You can't seriously expect people to be okay with this," she snapped. "You've turned your driveway into some kind of medieval joke." Frank, still seated in his lawn chair, took a sip of his beer. "I think it's kind of awesome." Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "This isn't over." She spun on her heel and marched back to her house, slamming the door so hard that her wreath fell off. That night, I celebrated. The drawbridge was complete, fully functional, and best of all, Karen had no way to fight back. She had tried to bully me, manipulate the HOA, and use every dirty trick in the book, but now she was faced with a reality she couldn't change. She had lost. Or so I thought. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of loud banging outside. I rushed to the window, expecting the worst. What I saw made my blood boil. Karen, along with 2 other HOA members, was standing at the edge of my property, gesturing wildly at a city inspector. I threw on my jacket and stormed outside. "What's going on here?" The inspector turned to me, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Sir, I received a complaint about an unauthorized structure on your property. I'm here to inspect it." I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "My drawbridge is completely legal. I have all the permits." Karen let out a triumphant laugh. "Oh, we'll see about that." The inspector pulled out a clipboard and began looking over the structure. He checked the permits, measured the dimensions, and even asked me to demonstrate how it worked. I complied with everything, keeping my cool even as Karen hovered nearby, waiting for some kind of mistake to be found. After nearly an hour, the inspector finally put his clipboard down and turned to Karen. "Everything is up to code. There are no violations here." Karen's face contorted in disbelief. "What? But, no, that can't be right. This is a hazard. It's unsafe. It's an eyesore." The inspector adjusted his hat. "Legally speaking, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a driveway modification, and the homeowner has followed all regulations. There's nothing the city can do." I fought the urge to smirk as Karen's body practically vibrated with rage. She opened her mouth to argue, but seemed to realize she had nothing left. Without another word, she turned and stomped back toward her house, slamming her door once again. Frank chuckled. "I swear, that woman is going to give herself a heart attack." I sighed in relief. The final hurdle had been cleared. The drawbridge was here to stay. That night, I parked my car on the bridge, lowered it into place, and walked into my house with a sense of satisfaction I had never felt before. Karen had tried everything. She had blocked my driveway, weaponized the HOA, and even tried to get the city involved. But in the end, she had lost, and I had a moat and a drawbridge. I had won. The morning after my final victory, I stepped outside with a cup of coffee, enjoying the sight of my completed moat and fully functional drawbridge. It had all come together so perfectly that it almost felt surreal. My driveway, which had once been a battleground for HOA nonsense and Karen's entitlement, was now a masterpiece of both petty revenge and legal genius. I pressed the button on my remote, and the drawbridge slowly lifted, the hydraulic arms smoothly pulling the wooden platform into the air. The sound was satisfying, a mechanical confirmation of my triumph. Karen hadn't said a word since the city inspector had shut down her final attempt to stop me. It was the longest I had ever gone without hearing her voice screaming about HOA rules, property values, or whatever self-important complaint she had that day. But I knew better than to think she had accepted defeat. She wasn't the type to walk away gracefully. If she wasn't yelling at me, she was planning something. Sure enough, later that afternoon, I noticed her peeking out from behind her curtains, watching as I crossed my drawbridge with a smug grin. I could feel the sheer weight of her frustration, the utter helplessness in her glare as she realized she had lost the power she once held over me. The war she had started was over, and she had been utterly, humiliatingly defeated. That night, I decided to have a little fun. I sent a video of the drawbridge in action to a couple of friends, who immediately lost their minds over it. Within hours, the video had been shared in multiple group chats, and before I knew it, someone had posted it online. The internet, as it turns out, loves a good HOA revenge story. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. People I hadn't spoken to in years were texting me links to forums, Reddit threads, and even a viral Twitter post featuring my drawbridge. The comments were a mix of disbelief, admiration, and outright celebration. This is the single most legendary act of pettiness I've ever seen. Dude built a medieval fortress just to spite his HOA. Absolute king. This is the energy I want to bring into every conflict in my life. Even local news outlets caught wind of the story. A reporter reached out, asking if they could come by for an interview. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to make a spectacle out of the situation, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that letting the world see Karen's downfall was just another layer of poetic justice. The reporter arrived that afternoon, a camera crew setting up in my driveway as I stood proudly next to my moat. The interview itself was simple enough. They asked why I had built it, and I told them the truth. Because my driveway had been stolen, and when all reasonable options were exhausted, I found a legal way to take back what was mine. Karen, of course, was watching the entire time. She had positioned herself on her porch, arms crossed tightly, her expression sour enough to curdle milk. I could almost hear the sound of her teeth grinding as she realized that not only had she lost, but her failure was now public knowledge. After the news segment aired, the reaction online only grew. The video gained millions of views overnight, and soon enough, people started digging into the HOA that had let this nonsense happen in the first place. The backlash was so strong that the board started distancing themselves from Karen, acting as if they had never supported her in the first place. Even Frank, the one board member who had always seemed reasonable, reached out and told me that the HOA was considering revising some of their policies. Karen's downfall didn't stop there. A week after the interview aired, I noticed a for sale sign appear on her front lawn. The woman who had terrorized the neighborhood for years, who had wielded the HOA's power like a weapon, was packing up and leaving. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. She had spent so much time trying to control everyone around her, but in the end, she was the one forced to run away. The day the moving trucks arrived was a celebration in itself. Neighbors who had once stayed silent, afraid of Karen's wrath, came out to watch as she loaded her overpriced furniture into the back of a van. Dave, my longtime ally in this war, stood beside me with a beer in hand, shaking his head in amusement. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said. "Neither did I admitted. Karen avoided looking at me as she walked to her car, her lips pressed into a thin line. For once, she had nothing to say. No threats, no snide remarks, no final attempt at winning. She just got into her vehicle and drove away, disappearing down the street like a bad memory, finally fading into the past. After she was gone, the neighborhood changed. Without Karen breathing down everyone's necks, things became more relaxed. The HOA meetings became less about ridiculous rule enforcement and more about actual community improvements. The board members who had once been her allies suddenly found themselves on the receiving end of questions they couldn't answer. Over time, some of them resigned, replaced by people who actually cared about making the neighborhood better instead of just exerting control. My moat and drawbridge remained, a monument to the battle that had been fought and won. The HOA eventually reached out and asked if I'd consider removing it now that Karen was gone, but I simply laughed and told them that after everything I went through, I had no plans to undo my masterpiece. Surprisingly, even they didn't push back too hard. By then, they had learned their lesson. The best part, however, was my new neighbor. When the house was finally sold, I was bracing myself for another HOA fanatic, but instead, I got someone completely different. The new guy, Ben, turned out to be a chill, easygoing guy who took one look at my drawbridge and immediately declared it the single greatest thing he had ever seen. One evening, he came over with a six-pack and a fire pit setup, and we ended up talking for hours. It was the first time in years I had been able to truly relax on my own property without some kind of HOA nonsense looming over my head. As we sat there, watching the fire crackle and reflecting on the chaos that had unfolded, Ben shook his head in disbelief. "You really build a moat just to get back at your neighbor?" he asked. I took a sip of my drink and grinned. "Yep," he laughed. "That's some next-level dedication, man." I glanced over at my drawbridge, still standing strong, still raising and lowering with the simple press of a button. If you're going to fight a battle, I said, you might as well make sure you win.